Hey folks, greetings from the Offensive Security Group here at Secure IT 360, coming at you with a new episode of the Cyber Threat Perspective. I hope everybody had a very Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, whatever you celebrate. So today I'm here again with Darrius. How's it going, Darrius?
Yeah, doing well.
Good,
Try to stay
cool.
warm over the break.
I heard it's been pretty cold down there. Cool. So, the topic today is LastPass. We're going to talk about kind of the recent news with LastPass. What does this mean in terms of risk? What do Darius and I think? What's been the scuttlebutt in the security community? And we're going to talk about maybe our recommendations, what we think is a prudent course of action to take. Should you be a LastPass user or a business that uses LastPass? And again, we'll talk about some of our thoughts and opinions and kind of get in our soapbox a little bit and have a grand old discussion about password managers and LastPass and all that jazz. So, I'm excited to talk about this with you, Darius. This has been a hot topic in the news. So, why don't you give us the details, lay down what's happened so far, and we'll go from there.
Yeah. So I think first it'd probably be prudent to go back to the beginning, right? A couple of months ago, um, LastPass announced that they had a breach, and initially, through their investigation, the initial announcement was that the threat actors they gained access to their developer environment, and that there was no evidence that they gained access to any customer data, and more importantly, the customer vaults. So LastPass, the whole idea behind it is it's a password manager. You have your vault full of passwords and secrets, and ideally, it's all encrypted. And the only way to decrypt it and gain access to it is with a master key that only you have. Well, over the Christmas holiday, LastPass revealed that the threat actors actually did indeed gain access to the customer vault data, specifically the backup customer vault data. And so with that, that includes pretty much, every single secret that a customer may have put in their vault, which is extremely scary. The idea is, you're supposed to use a password manager. It's supposed to make things more secure and more efficient. And you're trusting it to a third party, and then boom, as a result of them being breached, now all of your secrets could potentially be at risk. And so that's really where a lot of the fear and why why the industry is kind of taking this extremely seriously.
Yeah, definitely. And as people started investigating this further and looking into it, the attackers did get the backups, so potentially historical records of password vaults, excuse me, of vaults of passwords, encrypted data within those vaults. And then one of the other things that we'll bring up in a minute and talk more about in detail is the metadata, right? People did, some researchers and security people were digging into this a little bit more, and they come to find out that there's a handful of metadata that's actually not encrypted in the vault. And one of those fields is the URL field. The URL field is, the website itself, google.com or Gmail or, whatever website is in there. And one of the risks, and we'll talk about more of the risks in a second, but one of the risks that, reminds me of, or I think of when I see that is, you sign up for a service, right? And it LastPass, if you're signed in, you sign up for the service, it sends like the reset email or the new user email, and it has like a token in it, right? The reset token or the new user setup token, things like that sometimes can get stored in those URLs. And if that website isn't coded properly to recycle those or make sure that those are only available for a limited amount of time, you're looking at potentially being able to take over that account now, just from that URL field. So the thing for me is, in terms of like a background on this, is one, making sure that you have a strong master password, which we'll get to in a minute, but the metadata is also a big, serious, aspect of this. Not only just getting access to the password vault itself. So that being said, let's talk about risk, Darius. You mentioned master passwords, right? Those your master password is what's used to encrypt your vault with LastPass. We know that. We know that the master password itself and the vault itself is encrypted with a certain algorithm, and there's certain math involved with that. But what do you think? The risks are right out of the gate with this breach, and what are some things we should be worried about?
So I do think I really like the point you brought up about metadata, because that's often something that we just don't think of, and yeah, it does expose a lot of information. It can be exploited. So that's not something I thought of. But in terms of master passwords, I think really the big risk is if you have a weak master password. Um, Man, there's a potential, like if the threat actor has your vault, you have a weak master password, they're going to basically get in and gain access to your secrets. So if your master password is spring 2022, you might want to change that and never
Yep.
use it ever again. Um, but in terms of the potential risk, what could the threat actor do? It's the classic case of, hey, I have nothing but time.
Yep.
So you can there's brute force attacks, there's dictionary attacks. The threat actor essentially can sit on it. They have the data already, and they can just churn away at it until they get in.
Yep.
Now, granted, this is from a brute force attack perspective. This is unrealistic because it would take an extremely long time. Um, but still, for like even just as far as like dictionary attacks go, I mean, I wonder if I had that data, if I were to just run the rock word list, how
Yeah.
many would I pop? I imagine
Right.
probably pop a good bit, um,
Or
especially because I
any
know like
number.
last. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, or any number of breach password lists, right? Like,
Yeah.
have I been pwned has a breach password list. Any number of password list or combination of them. You're talking about now. You mentioned RockU. Now you're talking about creating word lists to credential
Mhm.
stuff, right? Which is a little bit weird or uncommon, maybe to do it in this way. Normally, you're like spraying a website or a service or something like that. Now you're trying to credential stuff a master password for a password vault. So now that the attackers have that, like you said, now any future breaches for any other future websites, they can just stuff those in and see if they work, right?
Yeah, which is
Facebook gets
terrifying.
if Facebook gets hacked, 6 months or 2 years from now, they can go back in time, kind of back in time, air quotes, right? But go to those vaults, right, and try those passwords that they found on those vaults because they have the copies of the vaults, right? So it's really crazy to think that a breach 4 years from now, right, could affect your vault, in its current form if you don't change those secrets, right?
And
Which is just
what I think is interesting also is LastPass, it wasn't just marketed as strictly an enterprise tool. It was marketed towards end user,
right.
like normal people, normal consumers.
Yep.
And so I think that just really that increases the chance of weak passwords just
Mhm.
tenfold just right off the bat.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah,
so
Grandma Susie to, your Aunt Irene or, whoever, like everybody, a lot of people use LastPass. They have a very significant user base.
yep,
So I don't know what the exact count is, but I mean millions. I mean
yeah, the
tens of
potential is
millions.
it's yeah, it's the potential is insane as far as how far this can go. Um, but I will say, I think more realistically, as far as the risk, I think what you'll see is you can expect to see an increase of phishing attacks to where if I have your vault and I know who you are and I have your email, I'm gonna hey, this is LastPass. You
Yep.
know we've just been breached. We're trying to get things under order, so we
Yep.
need you to like sign in and use your master password so we
Yep.
can get things under order. And then now I have your master password. So I think that's
Yeah.
more realistically, I think we can expect to see that at least more so than, brute forcing.
Yeah. Yeah, and specifically with the metadata that's unencrypted, right? Now that's just extra information that somebody can use, that an attacker can use to craft more accurate phishing emails, right? Imagine combining our two favorite things recently, which is Chat GPT, like an AI chatbot,
Ooh.
combine it with data from the LastPass breach and say, hey, give me some passwords to try for specific users. Here's the information. Right now you are able to create word lists more efficiently, phishing pretext more efficiently, and you automate it all, code it all, and now you're looking at a really sophisticated way to develop pretext for phishing emails, instead of just developing like one template and sending it out to all of the users of the LastPass breach. Now potentially you can customize it for every single user, and get much more effective phishing emails and probably a much higher success rate. So definitely very interesting in that regard.
Man, so that's one of those things. That's so cool, but it's terrifying.
Yeah.
But yeah, but no, that's cool.
Yeah, the
Um,
more information you have, it's just more ammunition. We share all of our lives are online, right? We shop online, we socialize online, we work online. There's just so much information, and this LastPass breach, just goes to show that just pretty much all of your information is going to be online at some point. Just pretty much guarantee that everything you have online is, or everything about you is going to be online at some point. So the way you make passwords and the way you store those secrets has to be, really thoughtful.
so something last thing I'll say now, I'll try not to rabbit trail too much on this, but I wonder if this will, you see it happening a little bit, but you have some people that are like, we just need to do away with passwords. And you have, applications now that are passwordless where, you get a magic
Mhm.
link. I wonder if, as a result of this, if we'll start to see an increase in that, a little bit more. Just because I do think from some perspective, it might be more manageable in some situations,
Yep.
maybe more secure to be like, hey, that we don't have passwords. You get a magic link to your email, and assuming your email isn't compromised, there is
Yep.
no password to be stolen.
Yep.
Um,
Yeah, there's services that do that now, and I think one of the things that will maybe help with that cause is Apple with their recent iOS update, allows the use of security keys. So I think security keys or physical tokens or key fobs and things like that will be the next step, right? You have Windows Hello or Microsoft Hello, whatever they're naming it now, where you can sign in with your face with, like we talked about, YubiKeys. So I think the tokens and passwordless is going to jump to that as the next step. If I were to kind of like pontificate or theorize, and I think stuff like this will help that cause. The LastPass breach will help that initiative. So if I had to guess, I would say it's probably going to be something like that, where you have a device that's the authenticator, or the means in which you authenticate, and you don't use a password. Um, I still think we have a long way to go with that, but I
So what you're
think,
saying is getting on the ground floor, we're going to see the rise of YubiKeys. Go ahead and invest in those companies.
yeah, yeah, but I mean,
you know,
yeah, like YubiKeys and RSA tokens, like they've been around for a while, right? And
yeah,
RSA has had their
yeah.
own share of issues with leaking seed, encryption keys and stuff like that. But I think, realistically, if we're going to kind of future proof or kind of design for a more secure future, I think we do have to move away from passwords. It's just going to be a difficult task, right? And I think tokens or device-based authentication is probably a good next step. Because if your device is compromised, like you just assume everything else is.
Yep.
So
All right. So let's say I'm a LastPass user. Spencer, what do I do?
the sky is falling. No, just kidding. And that's one of the things we were talking about, before we went live, is like we do think this is a serious thing. It's always something to take seriously. You should educate yourself and understand the risks and what those risks are to you individually or to your organization. But sky is not falling just yet. It's not all doom and gloom. You do have you do have the saving grace knowing that your vault is encrypted in some way, shape, or form. And like we said, if you do have a strong master password, the chances that it'll be brute forced are probably low, maybe. I don't want to say that for sure, forever, but at least you're a little bit less at risk than somebody who's maybe got a really weak master password. So for me personally, I would say, is my master password, fairly secure? In that, is it a strong password? If not, I definitely want to begin rotating passwords and secrets and, looking at the data that I have stored in there, both passwords and metadata, right? URL fields, whatever other data is in LastPass that might not have been encrypted. I want to take a look at that, and anything that I think is maybe at risk, I want to change, move, rotate, etc. So that would be the first place that I would start. What about you, Darius? How does that sound to you? I know, like, people have hundreds, if not thousands, of passwords in LastPass, right?
Yeah, and
So it can be hard.
yeah.
It's a huge task to say, oh, I'll just rotate all my passwords. I have like 10,000 passwords in there.
Yeah, that's a tough one. I agree. Overall, I agree. Me personally, I lean more towards being overly cautious. So, like, even if I have a strong master password, I think it never hurts to rotate. And honestly, you should probably be rotating your secrets on a routine basis, anyways. Um, so, hey, this is a good opportunity to start that best practice, right? Um, but yeah, I would personally lean on the side of rotating passwords, at least the important ones. If you have
Yep.
10,000, that can be a lot. But maybe whittle away at it.
Yep.
And this while this is horrible, there is opportunity. This is a chance to essentially audit your secrets and your accounts. It gives you a chance to look back and say, hey, do I even still use this service? Do I
Right.
even still need it,
Yep.
etc. So there's maybe a tiny bit of a silver lining.
Yep. Yeah, I would agree with that. I would pick the most important ones, your email, your bank, whatever else you think is the most important for your identity or your means of getting paid or doing business or living and things like that. The most important ones change first, and then go through audit and check out what else you might need to change. And the question becomes, do you keep them in LastPass, right? Like, do I rotate them, change the passwords, and do I keep them in LastPass? Do I get something else? That's probably a question that
Yep.
people are going to have next is, okay, if not LastPass, what? Or how do I securely use LastPass so this doesn't, affect me should this happen again?
So that's when things get tough because my heart goes out to everyone who currently works at LastPass, because anytime you're a major company like that and you face a breach, you can expect a loss in revenue. You've lost that trust. You can look back to Okta, right, where they had their breach earlier this year, and I mean I'm pretty sure they lost a share of the market as a result. Um, so it's never easy. I will say though, to be devil's advocate, because right now I know they're facing a lot of bash right now within the industry.
Yep.
And keep in mind, I've never been a fan of LastPass, if only because of their how they sell it. Like I didn't like the whole pick between mobile device or PC. I didn't like that how they package it like that. But to play devil's advocate, incident response and revealing breach information is not an easy thing. I know, Spencer, we've been involved in incident responses before. They can take a long time, and depending on how sophisticated the attack was,
Yep.
you may find out a piece of information, or you'll find a thread and you'll start to pull on it, and then you'll form this hypothesis of what happens.
Yep.
and you do your best to take the information you have and to say, okay, this is all that happened, but there's always that uncertainty.
Yep.
And the more you dig and look through things, the more you're going to uncover. um so I will say that's something that I try to keep in mind, when I think of these breaches, because it's really easy to bash a company and say, "Oh,
Yep.
you're supposed to be this great big security company, and you got breached. How are we supposed to trust you, etc."
Yep.
Um, I just think we really have to be careful with how we handle that, because
Yeah.
the alternative would be, them just spouting out a whole bunch of information and then coming back and saying, "Oh, wait, that information is wrong.
Yeah.
We did more investigation, and that's not what happened." And that, in my opinion, is an even worse look.
Yeah.
So just
Yeah.
my 2 cents.
Yeah, definitely. And you can't exactly jump ship every time a company has a security incident, right? If that were the case, no one would use Okta or Microsoft or AWS or Google or X, company here, right? You can't always, we don't always have the luxury of just jumping ship every time something bad happens. Um, and part of it is LastPass is most definitely going to be making changes, right? I don't think there's any way for them to keep doing business the way they currently do with their user base if they don't make changes to how the vaults are architected from a security standpoint, right? I think that is a given that that's going to change. So you could be of the camp that says, "Hey, I'll wait it out. I'll trust LastPass to kind of do the right thing and design their product better, come out with an update somewhat recently that will further protect those vaults." I think encrypting the vaults just using the master password is not the best way to handle that. There's other ways to do that that are probably a little bit better, a little bit more secure. So I would be willing to bet that they're going to put some man hours into the design of that and come up with a better solution. The other option is, jump ship and find another solution. But what's to say that's not going to happen to 1Password or Bitwarden or Dashlane, or this could happen to anyone, right?
Yep.
This could happen to any single one of those password vault providers. And are you going to do due diligence on those? Like, if you switch to 1Password, are you going to research the product and look at the way it encrypts the data and do all those things? Or, do you know how to do that? Or, do you trust somebody's opinion to do that for you? Somebody online or somebody in person. So question becomes, at what point do we trust, right? At some point we have to trust, right? We're trusting Microsoft and Google and Amazon to kind of keep our data safe. At what point do we trust the product? In what point do we not trust it and do our own due diligence? So that's just some of my thoughts on that and like the products and the trust and things like that.
Agreed.
But I think, at this point, we want to talk about kind of core takeaways from this. Let's talk about, what we can do if we don't want to stay with LastPass, right? What some of the best practice we can do with some other products, considerations. But I think the main thing though is like definitely use a password manager, still
For sure.
use one, right? I think that we can all agree, everyone in the security community agrees that they're a net positive. We all need to be more mindful of the risks of them, right?
Oh yeah.
And how to combat those.
And like you said, Spencer, there's risk whenever you decide to use a third party service. That's
Sure.
just the reality of the matter. Every time you use a cloud service, there's risk involved. Um, and if this year has taught us anything, I think we can expect for breaches to occur. I mean, there were so many this year. Um, so I think it's definitely still use a password manager, but that's the reason why we have multiple controls and we don't rely solely on just one control.
Yep.
That being said, though, if you still want to use a password manager, but you're wary of sending it off to a third party, there are local password managers available. Um, there's I know two off the top of my head the two that I immediately think of are Bitwarden and KeyPass. Um, so with Bitwarden, there's a cloud version, right, where they host and take care of everything, but they also have a self-hosted option to where you can control it. You can have it set so that hey, only you can access it. Run it on a box somewhere, and you're somewhat good to go. At least at least you don't have to worry about it being stored elsewhere.
Yep.
Um, so a local option might be what people are interested in.
Yeah. And we could do a whole episode on the pros and cons of like self-hosting or versus using a SaaS password manager, right?
Yep.
Self-hosting is great. You get more control, but now you need to back it up yourself, right? You need to secure it yourself, right? What happens if your server that you've got Bitwarden running on just dies, right? You lose all your passwords. So there's pros and cons to both. You had mentioned in our notes, our show notes, KeyPass is another one
Yep.
that you can run locally. That's very popular. You can sync these using things like OneDrive or Dropbox.
Yep.
Now you've got a couple additional services involved, right? So there's a little bit more different risk there. But you definitely, let's talk about quickly, what are some of the things to look for, right? When I'm looking for a new password manager, Darius,
Yeah.
what should I be paying attention to?
So first of all, end-to-end encryption. So you definitely want encryption, at rest, but also in transit. And I'm sure we will see, LastPass kind of changing their stance on this. But ideally, everything is encrypted.
Yep.
So I think we'll start to see a little bit of that. You want to make sure that they're following, the best practices, and are following up-to-date security measures and things of that nature. So from a security standpoint, that's what you want. But I would also say from a usability standpoint, make sure it's compatible with your workflow. So I
Yep.
mentioned it. I mentioned it a little bit earlier. Of one of the things that put me off the LastPass is it would have been more expensive to integrate it into my workflow to have, because me ideally I want my password manager to work on all of my devices out the box. I want to pay one fee.
Yep.
And so you kind of have to balance that out a little bit. So I mentioned KeyPass. KeyPass is amazing, and there are a lot of it's extensible. There are a ton of plugins that allow you to do a lot of cool things. But with that, it requires more of a manual setup, and you have to manage it all yourself. So I look at like for KeyPass, if I want it on a mobile device, there's a roundabout way and maybe it's changed, but there's a roundabout way of doing it where you have to get an extension, and then there's an app you have to download, and then you have to upload
Yep.
your vault to some third party service, and or so that way you can sync between your KeyPass on your phone and your KeyPass
Yep.
on your PC. And that to me isn't exactly consumer friendly.
Right.
I'm not going to be able to tell my grandma, hey, this is all you need to do to keep yourself
Right.
secure.
Or organization friendly, right? There's no
Yeah.
audit trails. It's harder to audit things like that or track those things or automatically rotate passwords and do like
Yeah.
privilege identity management or privilege account management.
What happens when
Those
things
things
get out of
can,
sync?
yep.
It's yeah. So those are some things you want to consider, and then most importantly, going back to the security front is make sure whatever service you use that they don't store or maintain your master password. That's just
Yep.
right off the bat. Because if that was the case, then that company now has access to all of your secrets,
Yep.
and when they get breached, hey, there it is.
Yep. Yeah, definitely. And like we were talking about before, 1Password, I was reading that they do encryption a little bit differently. They do it on the device side, so it's not tied to the master password, which I think is great. So it's more device specific. So definitely look at the way, if there is information, look at the way that the master password and or the secrets or the vault or whatever the data is encrypted. Look into how that's being done, how those encryption keys are derived, how they're stored, and that kind of thing. I think a company that's willing to share some of that information about how that's done will maybe start to see a little bit more market share, because I think people are going to be paying attention more closely to that. Maybe at least some of the more tech focused consumers, the ones that are a little bit more into that kind of thing. Surely, like Aunt Susie or Grandma Joe are not going to care about PBDF2 or whatever the encryption algorithm is. I forget. And 100,000 iterations and blah blah blah. But to like people like you and I, that is significant to us. We want to know, is it 100,000 iterations? Is it 10? Sometimes that makes a difference based on the algorithm. And those are some of the details that I think organizations should share if they have a solution like that. And those are some of the things you can look at. So wrapping it up in closing, the sky is not falling just yet. I mean, this is a serious thing. Obviously, we want to take serious. It is, like you said, a good opportunity to kind of go through your vault, audit your secrets and your passwords and all that, and maybe change some of the more important ones. And of course, just keep an eye out for phishing attacks or increases in social engineering, both, to your personal email, work email, things like that. Darrius, any last comments or topics?
Yeah, so the last thing that kind of comes to my mind is I think it's going to be really interesting moving forward in the future from a pen testing perspective of now that these vaults are out here. I imagine at some point they will just be available, right? So I'm just think it's going to be really interesting to at some point, if there's an external pen test, there's a process of just like, oh yeah, check to see if their vault is out there, and
Right.
if you can get into their vault. That's going to be
Yep.
pretty interesting.
Yeah, I'm sure there'll be a website and a logo and like a slogan and all that, just like everything else. Like once it's if this is made public. Cool. All right. Well, that's our show today. If you enjoyed this episode, we would love it if you would subscribe and like and follow and share it on your favorite social networks so we can reach more people and help educate and inform and maybe entertain other people as well. So appreciate it. Everybody take care. We'll see you next time.